The invitation that became a joke, but when I arrived, everyone fell silent. I know the exact moment Julian Hart's friends realize he's actually serious about bringing me to the charity gala, because the laughter in his study shifts from amused to uncomfortable. All expensive suits and old money arrogance suddenly confronted with the reality that their famously selective friend has chosen his housekeeper as his date to the most exclusive social event of the season. I'm standing in the hallway outside with fresh linens I was supposed to deliver 20 minutes ago, frozen in place by the sound of my existence becoming entertainment for people who've never bothered learning my name despite 3 years of cleaning their messes and pretending their conversations aren't as shallow as they actually are. You're joking. Please tell me you're not actually bringing your domestic staff to the Bennett Foundation Gala. That's social suicide even for someone with your complete disregard for appropriate behavior. The voice belongs to Marcus. Something, old family money, and newer desperation to stay relevant in circles that are slowly forgetting his father's name. I'm not joking. The invitation explicitly requires a companion. And Iris is intelligent, well-read, and significantly better company than most of the women who've been aggressively pursuing invitations through increasingly transparent methods. Julian's tone carries that particular edge of bored irritation he uses when people question decisions he's already made, and hearing him defend me to his friends does something complicated to my chest that I absolutely refuse to examine too closely. She's your housekeeper, Julian. Bringing her is either a statement about class warfare or evidence that you finally lost touch with reality completely. Or it's evidence that I value genuine conversation over performative social climbing. But I can see how that concept would be foreign to people who've spent their entire lives networking instead of actually connecting with anyone. The silence that follows is loaded with offense, and I should probably move before someone opens the door and discovers I've been listening to them discuss my unsuitability for events I'd never aspired to attend in the first place. But my feet seem rooted to expensive carpet, while my brain processes the fact that Julian Hart not only knows my name, but apparently values my intelligence enough to defend his choice to bring me into spaces where I fundamentally don't belong. Fine, bring the help to the gala. But don't come crying to us when every woman there treats you like you've lost your mind and every man there assumes she's available for entertainment beyond just cleaning houses. Marcus again, his voice dripping with exactly the kind of casual cruelty that makes me understand why Julian keeps most people at a carefully maintained distance. If anyone treats Iris as anything other than my invited guest, I'll make sure they understand exactly how permanent social consequences can be when you've offended someone with actual influence. The threat is delivered so casually it takes a moment to register the steel underneath, and I find myself finally moving away from the door before I hear anything else that might complicate the careful professional distance I've maintained since accepting a job that pays better than anything else available to someone with my limited formal education. That evening, when the house is quiet and Julian's insufferable friends have finally left, I'm in the kitchen finishing the last of the dinner cleanup when he appears in the doorway with an expression that suggests he's been looking for me, and is annoyed it took this long to locate me in his own house. You heard the conversation this afternoon. I could tell by the way you've been avoiding eye contact all evening and the fact that you've cleaned the same counter 3 times in the last 5 minutes. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was delivering linens and happened to overhear some of the discussion about your questionable choice in companions for important social events. I keep my voice carefully neutral, because admitting how much his defense affected me feels dangerous when I'm already struggling to maintain appropriate boundaries with an employer who somehow makes even simple conversations feel charged with implications I'm not equipped to handle. Then you also heard me make it clear that I value your company over the alternatives, which I assume is making you uncomfortable based on the way you're currently treating that counter like it personally offended you. He moves into the kitchen with that casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about whether you belong in spaces you occupy. And when he's close enough that I can smell his cologne mixing with the lingering scent of expensive whiskey, I find myself trapped between the counter and the reality that my employer is standing significantly closer than professional distance typically allows. I appreciate the invitation, but I think we both know that me attending would create exactly the kind of social complications your friends were warning about. I'm not interested in being the source of gossip or judgment that affects your reputation. My reputation can survive anything, including bringing someone who actually interests me to an event full of people who bore me to the point of considering dramatic exits through expensive windows. His voice carries that dry humor I've learned to recognize over 3 years of careful observation. The question is whether you're brave enough to walk into a room full of sharks, wearing something other than your usual armor of invisibility, and let them see what I've been noticing for significantly longer than is probably appropriate. And what exactly have you been noticing? Because from my perspective, you've barely acknowledged my existence beyond ensuring coffee is delivered on time, and rooms are maintained to your exacting standards. I've noticed that you leave books in my study with passages marked that perfectly address conversations we've never actually had. I've noticed that you somehow know when I need silence versus distraction. I've noticed that you're significantly more intelligent than you let people see, because being underestimated is safer than being actually seen in households where staff are supposed to be functional rather than interesting. The admission is delivered with an intensity that makes it clear this isn't casual observation, but careful attention paid over months, or possibly years, and the weight of being truly seen by someone I've spent considerable effort remaining invisible to makes my breath catch in ways that have nothing to do with the kitchen suddenly feeling too warm. That's a lot of noticing for someone who's never bothered having an actual conversation beyond instructions about household management, because having actual conversations with you would make it significantly harder to maintain the professional distance I'm supposed to preserve with staff, and I've been barely managing that distance as it is without adding the complication of admitting I find you fascinating. Julian, this is inappropriate. I work for you, and accepting an invitation to a gala as your date crosses lines that exist for very good reasons. Then consider it a business arrangement. You attend as my companion to satisfy social requirements, and in return, I'll ensure you're compensated appropriately for the time and effort involved. He says it like offering money makes the situation less complicated, rather than significantly more so. Though I'd prefer you attend because you're curious what it feels like to be in spaces you've only ever occupied as invisible help, to see how people react when forced to acknowledge someone they've been trained to ignore. That sounds less like a business arrangement, and more like social revenge disguised as generosity. Perhaps both. I contain multitudes, and most of them enjoy watching entitled people confront their own assumptions. His smile is brief and genuine. Say yes, Iris. Let me take you somewhere you've never been, and show those insufferable people exactly what they've been missing by treating you as furniture. The smart response is declining, maintaining boundaries, protecting the job I need, and the professional relationship that keeps my life stable. But looking at Julian Hart standing in his kitchen at midnight, asking me to attend events I've only ever imagined from the outside makes Smart feel significantly less appealing than the reckless option of saying yes to something that could either be the most interesting night of my life or the catastrophic mistake that cost me everything I've carefully built. Fine, I'll go, but I have conditions. Name them. You don't make this about charity or helping the poor staff experience luxury. You treat me as an actual equal for the evening instead of a project you're elevating out of boredom. Done. Anything else? If your friends are cruel or dismissive, I'm leaving immediately, regardless of how it looks. I'm not enduring humiliation for the sake of your social experiment. If anyone is cruel to you, I'll ensure they regret it in ways that don't require your presence to witness. You have my word that attending with me means you're under my protection whether you want it or not. The promise delivered with such casual certainty makes something warm unfold in my chest, and I find myself nodding agreement before logic can intervene with all the reasonable objections about why accepting this invitation is probably the worst decision I've made in years of generally good judgment. Chapter 2. The Man Everyone Wants. The week between accepting Julian's invitation and the actual gala passes in a strange blur of heightened awareness where I'm suddenly noticing things about my employer that I deliberately trained myself to ignore for 3 years of professional self-preservation, like the way women call the house with increasingly transparent excuses to speak with him, or how he handles each attempt with the same polite disinterest that suggests he's perfected the art of rejection without ever actually being rude. I'm organizing his calendar Wednesday afternoon when Vanessa Whitmore calls for the 3rd time this week. Her voice dripping with practiced sweetness that doesn't quite hide the desperation underneath when she asks if Julian might be available for lunch to discuss a charity initiative that definitely doesn't require a private meal to coordinate. Mr. Hart is occupied this afternoon. I can schedule a call for next week if the matter is genuinely urgent. I keep my tone professionally neutral, even though we both know her charity initiative is code for another attempt to secure his attention in ways that have failed spectacularly for the better part of 6 months. Of course, though I did hope to discuss it in person, Julian and I have such productive conversations when we're not confined to phone calls and formal meetings. The implication is clear enough that even someone less observant than me would catch it, and I find myself experiencing something uncomfortably close to possessiveness about a man who technically employs me, and therefore shouldn't inspire any emotions beyond professional courtesy. I'll pass along your request. Have a lovely afternoon, Miss Whitmore. I end the call before she can continue fishing for information about Julian's schedule or personal life, and when I turn around, I find him leaning against his office doorway with an expression that suggests he heard the entire conversation and is entertained by my barely concealed irritation. Vanessa is persistent. I'll give her credit for determination even if her methods lack subtlety. She's called 3 times this week with increasingly elaborate excuses to arrange private meetings. At some point, persistence crosses into territory that requires more direct rejection. And how would you suggest I handle women who won't accept polite disinterest as an answer? Should I be cruel to spare their feelings or continue maintaining the professional courtesy that clearly isn't working? He moves into the room with that casual grace, settling into the chair across from his desk like we're having a normal conversation instead of discussing his apparently extensive history of unwanted romantic pursuit. You could try actually explaining why you're not interested, instead of letting them build elaborate fantasies about eventual reciprocation that you have no intention of fulfilling. I'm not interested because none of them see me as anything beyond access to money and social standing. They want Julian Hart, the carefully constructed public figure, rather than the actual person who exists when the performance ends. His voice carries an edge of frustration that suggests this is a complaint he's made before without resolution. It's exhausting being pursued for what you represent instead of who you actually are, which is probably why I find your complete lack of interest in either my money or my connections refreshing to the point of fascination. I'm not completely disinterested. I'm professionally appropriate. There's a significant difference between the two observations. So, you admit there's interest underneath the professional appropriateness. That's progress, considering you've spent 3 years pretending I'm just furniture that occasionally requires coffee. I've spent 3 years maintaining boundaries that keep me employed, noticing that my employer is attractive, and apparently the subject of considerable female attention doesn't mean I'm interested in joining the queue of women trying to secure his time. Good, because I have no interest in adding you to a queue. You're in an entirely different category that doesn't involve performance or strategy. The declaration should probably concern me more than it does, but instead I find myself wanting to know exactly what category he's placed me in, and whether it's as dangerous as the warmth in his voice suggests it might be. We should discuss logistics for Saturday. I assume you have something appropriate to wear, or do I need to arrange for options to be delivered? The abrupt subject change feels deliberate, like he's retreating from vulnerability. He didn't intend to reveal. I have a dress that should be suitable for the event. Nothing extravagant, but appropriate for the venue and occasion. Show me. I want to make sure you're not planning to blend into the background out of some misguided attempt to avoid attention. Julian, I'm not modeling clothing for you. That crosses about 15 different lines of appropriate employer-employee conduct. Then describe it. Give me enough information to know whether I need to intervene with something that does you justice instead of just meeting basic requirements. It's navy blue, simple cut, nothing that will draw excessive attention or make me stand out as obviously not belonging in whatever exclusive venue you're dragging me to. Navy blue that makes you invisible, or navy blue that you think makes you invisible because you're used to people not looking closely enough to see what's actually there. The question is more perceptive than I'm comfortable with, striking directly at my habit of choosing clothing that allows me to occupy spaces without being truly seen, and I find myself reassessing whether Julian Hart has been paying significantly more attention over the last 3 years than I ever gave him credit for. The former, though your sudden interest in my wardrobe choices is making me reconsider whether accepting this invitation was wise or just catastrophically poor judgment on my part. Probably both. But since you've already accepted, we might as well ensure you're not sabotaging yourself with clothing designed to help you disappear. He stands and moves to his desk, pulling out what appears to be a credit card attached to a note. "This is for you. Go to any boutique you want and find something that makes you feel powerful instead of invisible. Consider it part of the business arrangement we discussed. I'm not taking your money to buy a dress. That makes this feel significantly less like a professional arrangement, and more like something I'm not interested in participating in. It's compensation for attending an event where you'll be subjected to scrutiny and judgment from people who look for any excuse to dismiss you. Having armor that makes you feel confident seems like a reasonable business expense. Or it's you trying to dress me up like a doll for your own entertainment. I can't tell which motivation is worse. It's me wanting to see what happens when you walk into a room full of people who've trained themselves not to see you and force them to actually look." His voice has gone intense in ways that make my pulse race. "Take the card, buy the dress, and Saturday night we'll find out together whether my instinct about you is correct, or if I've been building elaborate theories about someone who prefers staying invisible." The card sits on the desk between us like a test I'm not sure I want to pass or fail, and after a long moment where we just stare at each other across expensive furniture, I reach out and take it before logic can intervene with all the reasonable objections about accepting money from employers for non-work-related expenses. "Fine, but I'm keeping receipts, and if this goes badly, I'm returning everything and pretending this entire conversation never happened." "Fair enough, though I have a feeling Saturday is going to be significantly more interesting than either of us is prepared for." Later that evening, when I'm alone in my small apartment holding Julian's credit card and trying to figure out what kind of dress makes someone feel powerful instead of invisible, I realize that somewhere in the last week, the dynamic between us has shifted from professional distance to something more complicated that I'm not sure either of us knows how to navigate without destroying the careful balance we've maintained for 3 years. My phone buzzes with a text from an unknown number, and when I open it, I find a message that's unmistakably Julian. Despite never having exchanged personal contact information before tonight. "Vanessa called again after you left. I told her explicitly that I'm attending the gala with someone I'm genuinely interested in, and that her continued pursuit is both unwelcome and increasingly inappropriate. Thought you should know in case she decides to make trouble Saturday. J.H." The casual admission that he's genuinely interested hits harder than it should, and I find myself rereading the message 3 times before responding with something that hopefully sounds casual, rather than revealing exactly how much those 4 words affected me. Appreciated. Though I'm now concerned about whether attending means walking into a situation where scorned women make my evening difficult out of territorial instinct. His response comes within seconds. "Anyone who makes your evening difficult will regret it permanently. You're under my protection, and I take that responsibility seriously. Now go buy the dress and stop overthinking whether accepting my help makes this complicated. We're already complicated. Might as well embrace it. J.H. Chapter 3. The entrance that silences the ballroom. The dress I find after 2 days of searching boutiques that normally wouldn't let me pass the door without Julian's credit card is nothing like the safe navy option I'd originally planned. All deep burgundy silk that moves like liquid against my skin, and a neckline that suggests, rather than reveals in ways that make me feel powerful and slightly terrified in equal measure. The stylist at the final boutique had taken one look at me and declared that my bone structure was being criminally underutilized by my usual choices, and 3 hours later I'm standing in front of my bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back with professional hair and makeup that somehow makes me look both elegant and dangerous, in ways I've never associated with my own reflection. Julian is supposed to pick me up at 7, but I'm running 20 minutes late, because the final touches took longer than anticipated, and when I finally arrive at the venue in the car, he sent after texting that he'd meet me there. My heart is racing with anxiety about walking into a room full of people who've only ever seen me as staff, if they bothered seeing me at all. The driver opens my door with careful courtesy, and I step out onto red carpet that's lined with photographers and guests in evening wear that probably costs more than I make in a year, and for a moment, I seriously consider getting back in the car and texting Julian that I've made a terrible mistake, and he should find literally anyone else to accompany him to this intimidating spectacle. But then I see him standing at the entrance scanning the arriving guests with an intensity that suggests he's been watching for me specifically. And when our eyes meet across the crowd, The expression on his face makes every anxiety about whether I belong here temporarily disappear under the weight of being looked at, like I'm the only person who exists in this moment. He moves through the crowd with purposeful grace, ignoring attempts to stop him for conversation. And when he reaches me, there's something in his expression that I've never seen before, all controlled shock mixed with something that might be pride or possibly possession. "You're late. I was beginning to think you decided this was too much pressure and abandoned me to face Marcus and his insufferable commentary alone." His voice is carefully controlled, but I can hear tension underneath. "Also, you're devastating. That dress is significantly better than anything I imagined when I suggested you find something powerful." The stylist had opinions about my usual choices, and 3 hours later this is what emerged. I'm still not entirely convinced I can pull this off without everyone immediately recognizing I'm playing dress-up in a world I don't actually belong to. "You're not playing anything. You look exactly like someone who belongs anywhere she chooses to be." His hand settles on my lower back as he guides me toward the entrance, and the possessive weight of it makes several nearby women track the gesture, with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. "Prepare yourself. We're about to walk into a room full of people who are going to have very strong opinions about my choice in companions." Reassuring, I feel so much better about this entire situation now. "Good. Nervous energy will keep you sharp when the knives come out disguised as polite conversation." The ballroom is exactly as overwhelming as I expected. All crystal chandeliers and expensive people making polite conversation that barely disguises the constant social maneuvering happening beneath surface courtesy. And the moment we step through the doors, I watch awareness ripple through the crowd like a visible wave. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Heads turn with poorly disguised interest, and I catch the exact moment when several people who definitely recognize me from their own houses process the fact that Julian Hart has brought his housekeeper as his date to the most exclusive social event of the season. The laughter I'd heard in Julian's study last week is absent, replaced by a silence that feels both gratifying and terrifying as we move deeper into the room with dozens of eyes tracking our progress. And I'm hyper-aware of the way Julian keeps me close with his hand still possessively placed on my back, like he's making a statement to everyone watching about exactly whose protection I'm under. Is it always this quiet when you enter rooms, or is this special attention reserved for shocking social choices? I keep my voice low, because speaking normally seems impossible when the entire ballroom appears to be holding its breath watching us. Usually there's background noise. This particular silence is people recalibrating their assumptions about what I will or won't do regarding social conventions. His voice carries amusement. Also, several women are currently experiencing the unique disappointment of realizing they've spent months pursuing someone who was apparently interested in his own staff the entire time. That's not helpful. Now I'm imagining all the ways they're planning my social destruction while maintaining perfect smiles. Let them imagine. Actual execution requires courage most of them don't possess when faced with someone who has no interest in preserving relationships with people he barely tolerates. Marcus approaches with a woman I recognize from magazines, all blonde perfection and old family money, and the expression on his face when he gets close enough to actually see me properly is gratifyingly shocked in ways that make the last 3 hours of preparation feel completely justified. "Julian, I see you actually went through with bringing your companion." Marcus's pause before companion carries enough judgment to make his opinion clear, without explicitly stating it. Though I must admit the transformation is more dramatic than I anticipated when we discussed this questionable decision. "Iris, this is Marcus Blackwell and his wife Caroline, neither of whom will be making any additional comments about my choices if they value continued invitations to events I control." Julian's tone is pleasant, but the threat underneath is unmistakable. "Of course, no offense intended. You look lovely, miss." Caroline's smile doesn't reach her eyes as she deliberately trails off, waiting for my last name, like it's a test I'm supposed to fail. "Just Iris is fine. I prefer to keep things simple rather than standing on formality that makes everyone uncomfortable." How refreshingly casual. The way she says casual makes it clear she means something significantly less complimentary. "You must tell me where you found that dress. It's remarkably sophisticated for someone in your position." My position as Julian's invited guest, or my position as someone you've decided doesn't merit basic courtesy? The words come out before I can stop them. Months of being invisible in houses like Caroline's finally finding voice, now that I'm being seen in contexts where I can actually respond. The sharp intake of breath from Caroline suggests I've just committed some kind of social violation. But Julian's hand tightens approvingly on my back, and when I glance at him, I see something almost like pride in his expression. I think what Iris is politely asking is whether you plan to spend the evening making thinly veiled insults, or if you'd prefer to direct your discomfort about my choices toward me instead of the person I've chosen to bring. Julian's voice has gone cold enough that even Marcus looks uncomfortable. Because continuing down this path means I'll be having very different conversations with your husband about business arrangements that suddenly need reevaluation. The threat is delivered so casually that it takes a moment to register, and I watch Caroline's expression shift from condescending to carefully neutral as she processes that attacking me means attacking Julian's judgment and potentially damaging connections her husband can't afford to lose. No offense intended. I'm sure we'll all have a lovely evening. Caroline's retreat is graceful but definitive, and as they move away, I hear Marcus hissing something angry under his breath that his wife responds to with sharp whispers about knowing when to retreat. That was either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which yet. Probably both, but I'm done pretending insults disguised as politeness don't register just because they're delivered with expensive smiles. Good. I was hoping you wouldn't let them intimidate you into the version of yourself that makes everyone comfortable by staying small and apologetic. We move deeper into the ballroom, and I watch the crowd part slightly to let us pass. All careful distance that suggests people are reevaluating how to approach someone who's clearly under Julian Hart's explicit protection. And the shift from invisible to unavoidably visible happens so completely that it feels almost physical. A woman I don't recognize approaches with genuine warmth, rather than calculated courtesy, introducing herself as Elena Russo, and complimenting my dress with enough sincerity that I can tell she's not performing for anyone's benefit, but actually means what she's saying. You're causing quite the stir. Half the room is scandalized, and the other half is trying to figure out who you are, and why Julian looks at you like you're the only interesting person here. Elena's smile is conspiratorial. For what it's worth, I think it's wonderful watching everyone's assumptions get shattered. This crowd could use more disruption to their carefully maintained hierarchies. I'm just trying to survive the evening without creating permanent damage to Julian's social standing. His social standing can survive anything, but watching him actually interested in someone for the first time in years is significantly more entertaining than another night of the same people making the same empty conversation. She moves on after extracting a promise that I'll find her later for actual conversation instead of social performance, and when I turn back to Julian, I find him watching the exchange with satisfaction. You're collecting allies. That's faster social navigation than most people manage in years of attending these events. Or Elena is just kind enough to take pity on someone clearly out of her depth in shark-infested waters. Elena Russo doesn't do pity. She's one of the few genuinely decent people in this room, and if she's decided you're worth knowing, then you've just gained protection beyond what even I can provide through threats and business leverage. The evening continues in a blur of introductions and conversations, where I'm forced to navigate between being Julian's companion and being myself in contexts where those two identities don't naturally align. And by the time we escape to the terrace for air, I'm exhausted from the constant performance of belonging in spaces that still feel fundamentally foreign, despite the expensive dress and professional styling. You did better than survive. You actually thrived once you stopped waiting for permission to exist in spaces you've earned the right to occupy. Julian's voice is warm with approval. Also, watching Caroline Blackwell realize she'd underestimated you was worth every uncomfortable moment of this entire evening. I may have been slightly more confrontational than wise, given that she has significantly more social power than I'll ever possess. She has social power that exists only as long as people like me tolerate her presence, and after tonight's performance, I'm significantly less inclined to maintain relationships with people who can't manage basic courtesy toward guests I've chosen to bring. If you're feeling that special connection to this narrative, that flutter in your stomach when he finally sees her, that satisfaction when she confronts the one who judged her, you're not alone. Our stories are different because we don't follow formulas. We create real emotions, genuine tension, characters you feel you know. If you want more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Now, let's go back to the moment when everything started to change. Chapter 4, When She Becomes Too Visible. The shift from being invisible to being unavoidably visible happens gradually over the next hour, as men I don't recognize approach with interest that feels genuine rather than performative. All polite introductions and questions about my background that suggest they're actually listening to answers, instead of just waiting for their turn to speak. The first is someone named David Chen, who runs a tech company and wants to know my thoughts on a book he noticed me reading in Julian's study 3 months ago, when he'd stopped by for a business meeting. And the fact that he'd not only noticed, but remembered what I was reading, makes the conversation significantly easier than the careful social navigation I'd been attempting with people who see me as Julian's questionable choice, rather than an actual person worth knowing. You have excellent taste in literature. That particular author doesn't get nearly enough recognition for how precisely she captures power dynamics in institutional settings. David's enthusiasm is refreshing, after an evening of carefully modulated responses designed to reveal nothing authentic. Are you in academia, or just someone who reads widely for personal interest? Personal interest mostly, though I've been considering going back to school for something more formal now that I have the financial stability to pursue education beyond just survival. The admission comes easier than expected, maybe because David is treating this like an actual conversation instead of interrogation disguised as small talk. If you're serious about that, I know several excellent programs that might interest you. Here's my card, and feel free to reach out if you want recommendations or introductions to people who could help navigate the application process. He hands over contact information with casual generosity that suggests this is genuine offer rather than empty networking performance. I'm processing the unexpected kindness when I feel Julian's presence behind me. That particular awareness I've developed over 3 years of unconsciously tracking his location in any space we share. And when I glance back, I find him watching the exchange with an expression I can't quite read that might be approval or possibly something more complicated. David, I see you've discovered that Iris is significantly more interesting than most of the people we usually suffer through at these events. Julian's tone is pleasant, but there's an edge underneath that makes me wonder if he's actually pleased about the attention I'm receiving, or just performing graciousness, while feeling something entirely different. She's delightful. You should have brought her to these things years ago instead of subjecting us all to whatever companion you felt obligated to provide. David's response is genuine enough that it should feel like a compliment, but something in Julian's expression suggests he's not entirely comfortable with how easily I'm connecting with people he's known for years. I'm realizing that now, though better late than catastrophically never. David excuses himself after extracting another promise that I'll reach out about educational programs, and the moment he's gone, Julian's hand finds my waist with pressure that feels more possessive than the casual touches earlier in the evening. You're collecting admirers at an alarming rate. I'm starting to think bringing you was either my best idea or a terrible miscalculation depending on how much I enjoy watching other men recognize what I've been trying to keep to myself. Are you actually jealous or just performing concern because that's expected when other people pay attention to your date? I'm experiencing something uncomfortably close to territorial instinct, which is new and somewhat alarming given that I don't typically care who pays attention to people I'm with. His voice has gone low and intimate despite the public setting. But watching David look at you like you're fascinating makes me want to make it very clear that you're here with me specifically, and any interest from others needs to be carefully reconsidered. That's remarkably possessive for someone who invited me as a business arrangement to satisfy social requirements. I'm discovering that my motivations were significantly less professional than I convinced myself they were when extending the invitation. Before I can respond to that loaded admission, another man approaches with the kind of calculated charm that suggests he's used to getting what he wants through persistence and expensive smiles. This one introduces himself as Richard Sterling, old money and newer arrogance, and the way his eyes track over me feels assessing in ways that make my skin crawl, despite the polite words coming out of his mouth. Julian, you've been hiding this lovely creature. How very selfish of you to keep her to yourself when sharing would be the generous thing to do. Richard's tone suggests he thinks he's being charming rather than immediately off-putting. I'm not a creature to be shared or hidden. I'm a person having a conversation, and your approach could use significant refinement if you're interested in actual dialogue instead of whatever performance this is. The response comes out sharper than intended, but I'm exhausted from hours of carefully moderating my reactions to people who can't decide if I'm worth basic courtesy or just Julian's temporary entertainment. Spirited. I like that in women who know their place. And what place would that be exactly? Because I'm having trouble understanding whether you think I'm entertainment or just someone beneath your usual standards who should be grateful for attention from men like you. Julian's hand tightens on my waist, and when I glance at him, I see something cold and dangerous in his expression that suggests Richard just made a serious tactical error in judgment. Richard, I'm going to give you exactly one opportunity to apologize to Iris for implying she should be grateful for your attention, and if you choose not to take that opportunity, I'll be having very different conversations with your father about business arrangements that suddenly need reevaluation. Julian, I was just making conversation. No need to be dramatic about harmless flirtation. Harmless flirtation doesn't involve implying someone knows their place or should be grateful for unwanted attention from people who've decided they're entitled to interest that hasn't been offered. Julian's voice has gone quiet in that particular way. That means he's done being polite and is moving into territory where consequences become permanent. Apologize now, or leave this event, and don't expect future invitations to gatherings I have any influence over. The silence that follows is loaded with tension, as Richard processes that pushing further means social consequences he's not prepared to face. And after a long moment, he delivers an apology so stiff it barely qualifies as genuine, before retreating with poorly disguised anger. You didn't have to threaten him on my behalf. I'm capable of handling entitled men who think charm excuses condescension. I'm aware you're capable, but allowing him to continue diminishing you in public would set a precedent that makes the rest of your evening significantly more difficult. His hand is still possessive on my waist. Also, watching him imply you should be grateful for his attention made me want to do significantly more than just threaten business consequences. So consider my response the civilized version of instincts that were substantially less appropriate for public settings. Civilized territorial instinct. That's a new category of behavior I wasn't aware existed. I'm discovering several new categories of behavior tonight. Most of them involve wanting to make it very clear to everyone here that you're with me, and any interest from others needs to be expressed with significantly more respect than Richard managed. A woman I recognize from society pages approaches with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, all calculated beauty and practiced charm that suggests she's here with specific intentions beyond just polite conversation. She introduces herself as Natalie Ashford and makes a point of standing close to Julian in ways that deliberately exclude me from their physical proximity, and I watch him step back to maintain the distance she's trying to eliminate with casual grace that makes her intrusion obvious to anyone paying attention. Julian, darling, I haven't seen you at any events recently. I was beginning to think you'd abandoned society entirely for more private pursuits. Her voice carries implications that make it clear she's fishing for information about his social life and romantic availability. I've been selective about which events merit attendance. Tonight's cause was compelling enough to make an exception. And you brought a guest. How unexpected given your usual preference for attending solo. Natalie's attention finally shifts to me, with assessment that's barely disguised as polite interest. I don't believe we've met. Are you new to the city or just new to our particular social circles? Neither. I've been here for years. You've just never bothered looking closely enough at people you've decided aren't worth noticing. The bluntness makes Natalie's smile falter slightly, and I watch her recalibrate her approach when she realizes dismissing me won't work while Julian is clearly paying attention to how this interaction unfolds. How refreshingly direct, though I suppose different backgrounds lead to different approaches to social navigation. The way she says different backgrounds makes her meaning unmistakably clear. Different backgrounds that include actually working for a living instead of just managing inherited wealth. Yes, I can see how that might seem foreign to someone who's never had to consider whether they can afford basic necessities. Iris, You're being unnecessarily confrontational with someone who's just attempting polite conversation. Natalie's voice carries reproach designed to make me seem unreasonable. Actually, she's responding appropriately to implications you're making about class differences while pretending to be polite. Julian's interjection is cold and definitive. And since you brought up backgrounds, let's discuss how your family's fortune was built on practices that wouldn't survive modern ethical scrutiny. Or we could acknowledge that judging people based on how they earn their living says significantly more about your character than theirs. The public correction makes Natalie's face flush with humiliation, and I watch her retreat with barely maintained dignity, while several nearby conversations pause, as people process that Julian Hart just publicly defended his housekeeper-turned-date against someone from established society. You keep making enemies on my behalf. Eventually that's going to create consequences you're not prepared to handle. Let it create consequences. I'm done tolerating people who think birth circumstances excuse treating others as less than human. His hand finds mine, threading our fingers together in a gesture that feels both intimate and like a public statement about exactly whose side he's chosen. Besides, watching you hold your own against people who expected you to crumble is significantly more satisfying than maintaining relationships with people I've never actually liked. Chapter 5. The Power Inversion. We escape to a private balcony overlooking the city an hour later, when the constant performance of navigating social warfare becomes too exhausting to maintain without breaking, and the relief of being alone with Julian in the cool night air makes me realize how much energy I've been expending just existing in spaces where my presence is constantly being evaluated and judged by people who can't decide if I'm worthy of basic respect. He's quiet for a long moment, leaning against the railing with that careful control that suggests he's processing something he doesn't quite know how to articulate. And when he finally speaks, his voice carries a vulnerability I've never heard from him in 3 years of daily interaction. I'm realizing tonight that I've been taking you for granted in ways I didn't fully understand, until watching other people recognize what I've been trying to keep invisible. And that recognition is forcing me to confront the fact that I've been significantly more invested in you than professional distance should allow. Julian, what are you actually saying? Because that sounds dangerously close to admitting feelings that complicate everything about our working relationship and my entire future stability. I'm saying that somewhere between the first book you left on my desk and tonight watching you hold your own against people who should terrify you, I stopped seeing you as staff and started seeing you as the only person in my life who actually understands who I am when the performance ends. He turns to face me fully, and the intensity in his expression makes my breath catch. I trust you in ways I've never trusted anyone, not with my money or my business, but with the parts of myself I keep hidden from everyone else. And realizing that trust has been building for years, while I convinced myself it was just professional compatibility, is making me question everything I thought I understood about appropriate boundaries. You're saying you've been falling for your housekeeper while pretending it was just appreciating good work? That's either romantic or a catastrophic failure of professional judgment depending on perspective? Probably both. I seem to be making a habit of that particular combination tonight. His smile is self-deprecating. But watching you tonight, seeing you navigate conversations with intelligence and grace while refusing to diminish yourself for people's comfort, I realized I've been in love with you for significantly longer than I'm comfortable admitting, and pretending otherwise was protecting us both from complications I'm no longer interested in avoiding. The confession should terrify me more than it does. All the logical reasons why my employer admitting feelings is the worst possible outcome for someone who needs this job and the stability it provides. But instead, I find myself moving closer, because the vulnerability in his expression is more compelling than any of the reasonable objections my brain is trying to articulate. I don't know how to respond to that without either ruining everything or making this significantly more complicated than it already is. You're my employer, and the power dynamic makes anything between us inherently problematic, regardless of feelings. Then quit. Not because I'm pressuring you, but because continuing to work for me while we figure out what this is creates exactly the kind of complications you're worried about. He says it so casually, like suggesting I abandon my only source of income is a reasonable solution to emotional complexity. I'll provide enough severance to cover 6 months of expenses while you figure out what you actually want to do instead of just surviving. And if what you want includes exploring this thing between us, then we can do it without the power imbalance making everything problematic. You're asking me to choose between financial security and the possibility of something that might not work out? That's a terrible deal for someone in my position. I'm offering you freedom to make choices that aren't dictated by needing to keep me happy for employment purposes. And yes, part of that offer is selfish, because I want to pursue this without you constantly questioning whether feelings are genuine or just survival strategy. And if I quit and we try this and it doesn't work, what then? Do I just lose both my job and whatever relationship we're building in one catastrophic failure? Then you have 6 months of financial security to find something better while I live with the consequences of ruining the only genuine connection I've had in years. His hand comes up to cut my face with gentleness that contradicts the intensity in his dark eyes. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm asking you to consider that maybe what we've been building for 3 years is worth the risk of leaving behind the safe option for something that could actually matter. Julian, I've been half in love with you since month 6, when you noticed I was reading during my lunch break and started leaving books you thought I'd enjoy on the kitchen counter without ever mentioning it directly. And spending 3 years pretending professional distance was protecting me, instead of just making me miserable, has been exhausting in ways I didn't want to admit. The confession comes out in a rush before I can stop it. But admitting that while you're still my employer feels like exactly the kind of vulnerability that gets people like me hurt when power dynamics shift and feelings become inconvenient. Then let me remove the power dynamic. Tomorrow I'll have legal documents drawn up that guarantee your severance and protect you from any retaliation if this doesn't work out the way we're both hoping. He's so close now that I can feel his breath against my lips. I'm asking you to trust that I know the difference between wanting someone and being willing to destroy their life to have them. And I promise that even if this ends badly, you'll be protected in ways that don't require you to sacrifice everything you've built. This is insane. We're standing on a balcony at a charity gala discussing ending my employment so we can explore feelings that might just be complicated attraction mixed with 3 years of proximity. Or it's us finally being honest about what's been building since long before tonight forced us to acknowledge it publicly. His kiss is careful and questioning, giving me space to pull back if this is too much too fast, but instead I find myself pulling him closer, because 3 years of professional distance has left me starving for exactly this kind of honest connection. The kiss deepens with careful intensity. All the want we've been suppressing finding release in touches that are both desperate and tender. And when we finally break apart, we're both breathing hard and staring at each other like we've crossed a line we can never uncross. So that's a yes to quitting and exploring whatever this is between us? That's a yes to having the legal documents drawn up and then making a decision when I'm not emotionally compromised by expensive dresses and vulnerability on balconies. Fair enough, though for the record, I'm hoping the decision lands on the side of giving this a real chance instead of protecting yourself from potential hurt by maintaining distance that's already been thoroughly destroyed. We should go back inside before people start speculating about what we're doing out here alone. Let them speculate. I'm done caring what people think about my choices, as long as you're comfortable with the attention our relationship is going to generate. Our relationship, you're very confident about outcomes that haven't been decided yet. I'm confident about what I want. The rest is just logistics and legal protection to make sure you're safe regardless of how this unfolds. We return to the ballroom, and I'm immediately aware of eyes tracking our entrance. All the careful observation that comes from people who've noticed our absence and are drawing their own conclusions about what it means. Julian keeps me close with possessive touches that make his intentions clear to anyone paying attention, and by the time we leave an hour later, I'm exhausted from the constant performance, but also exhilarated by the shift from invisible to unavoidably significant in his life. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. 6. The week following the gala passes in a blur of phone calls I'm not supposed to overhear and social media posts I probably shouldn't be reading, all speculation about Julian Hart's mysterious companion, and whether bringing his housekeeper to high society events represents eccentric choice or complete social breakdown, depending on who's doing the commenting. The legal documents he promised arrive Tuesday morning, delivered by a lawyer who treats the severance agreement like it's perfectly normal for employers to provide 6 months guaranteed income to staff they're romantically pursuing, and reading through pages of protection that ensure I'm financially secure, regardless of outcome, makes the decision to actually quit feel simultaneously safer and more terrifying than anything I've contemplated in years of careful risk management. Julian gives me space to process, maintaining professional distance during the day, while texting at night with observations about our respective days that feel more intimate than any physical proximity we've shared, and I'm learning that he's significantly better at articulating feelings through written words than verbal conversation when the pressure of immediate response is removed. Wednesday evening. I'm packing up my few belongings from the small room I've occupied for 3 years, when he appears in the doorway with an expression that suggests he's been working up courage to have a conversation. He's not entirely sure how to navigate. I've been fielding calls all week from people who have very strong opinions about my choices. Most of them think I've lost my mind, and a few have been explicitly cruel about you in ways that make me want to terminate business relationships permanently. I've seen some of the social media commentary. Apparently, I'm either a gold digger who trapped you through manipulation, or you're experiencing some kind of crisis that requires intervention from people who care about your well-being. I try to keep my voice light, but the constant judgment has been wearing on confidence I'd built up during the gala. Both narratives are insulting to you and wildly inaccurate about my decision-making capacity. I've spent the week making it very clear to anyone who'll listen that you're not a scheme I fell for, but someone I chose deliberately after years of knowing exactly who you are. He moves into the room, and suddenly the small space feels even more confined with both of us, and all the unresolved tension that's been building since the balcony kiss. That's sweet, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm now the subject of gossip and speculation that's going to follow me, regardless of whether we actually pursue this relationship or decide it was just temporary insanity brought on by expensive dresses and emotional vulnerability. Then we make sure it's not temporary. We commit to actually trying instead of letting other people's judgment dictate choices that should only matter to us. Julian, I quit my job today, gave formal notice and signed all your legal documents, so I'm officially unemployed and completely dependent on your severance to survive the next 6 months while I figure out what comes next. The admission makes it real in ways that thinking about it didn't quite accomplish. That's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and I have no idea if I made the right choice or just destroyed my life for feelings that might fade once the novelty of actually being together wears off. The novelty isn't going to fade because this isn't novelty. This is 3 years of foundation finally getting acknowledged and built on properly. He closes the distance between us, hands settling on my waist with familiar possessiveness. I know you're scared. I'm terrified too, because I've never actually cared enough about someone to risk this kind of vulnerability. But I'd rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if I'd been brave enough to pursue it. What if the gossip gets worse? What if being with me damages your reputation or business relationships in ways you can't recover from? Then I'll rebuild with people who don't base business decisions on who I'm dating. And honestly, if my reputation can't survive choosing someone genuine over someone appropriate, then it's not a reputation worth protecting. That's remarkably idealistic for someone who's spent his entire life carefully managing public perception and social connections. You're making me idealistic. It's uncomfortable and probably going to result in several poor business decisions. But I'm discovering I care more about keeping you than maintaining relationships with people who think birth circumstances matter more than actual character. His kiss is less careful than the one on the balcony, all the restraint he'd been maintaining finally breaking under weeks of accumulated tension, and the reality that I'm no longer his employee, and the power dynamic that made everything complicated has been legally dismantled. I respond with equal intensity. 3 years of suppressed want finding release in touches that map territory we've both been imagining, but never quite allowed ourselves to explore. And when we break apart, we're both breathing hard, and the small room suddenly feels charged with possibility that's both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. Come home with me, not to my house where you've worked, but to my actual home where I keep the parts of myself I don't show anyone else. Let me prove this is real instead of just convenient attraction. Julian, if I go home with you tonight, we both know we're not just looking at your book collection or having innocent conversation about feelings. We're crossing into territory that changes everything, regardless of whether it works out long term. I know. And I'm asking anyway because waiting feels impossible when you're finally free to actually be with me without employment complications making everything questionable. His actual home is nothing like the house where I've worked for 3 years. All personal touches and comfortable spaces that speak to someone who actually lives here, rather than just existing in beautiful rooms. The bedroom he leads me to is warm and intimate. Books stacked on nightstands and art that's clearly chosen for personal meaning rather than investment value. And when he pulls me close in this space that's entirely his, the last of my defenses finally crumble under the weight of wanting someone who spent 3 years proving through small gestures that he sees me as more than just convenient staff. What happens next is inevitable and overwhelming. 3 years of careful distance, finally dissolving into touches that are both desperate and reverent. Whispered admissions that strip away every pretense we've maintained about professional appropriateness or logical boundaries. The connection is profound, rather than just physical, emotional intimacy that makes everything else fade into insignificance. And when it's over, we're tangled together in his bed, breathing hard and staring at each other like we can't quite believe we finally stopped fighting what we both wanted. I love you. I should have said it before we did that, but I was too overwhelmed to form coherent words beyond your name. His voice against my hair is rough with emotion. He's not trying to hide. I love you too. Have loved you long enough that pretending otherwise was exhausting in ways I didn't want to acknowledge, because admitting it meant risking everything I'd built. No more pretending, no more professional distance, just us figuring out how to actually be together without all the complications that kept us apart. That sounds simple when you say it like that, but tomorrow morning, reality is going to crash back in with all the gossip and judgment and people who think I don't deserve you. Tomorrow morning, I'll make it very clear through actions rather than just words that you're not just someone I'm dating casually, but someone I'm choosing publicly and permanently, regardless of who disapproves. His arms tighten around me. Let them judge. Let them gossip. As long as you're here, I don't actually care what anyone else thinks about choices that only affect us. You say that now, but wait until the business consequences actually start affecting your bottom line. My bottom line will survive anything, including social disapproval from people whose opinions I've never actually valued. You're not a liability. You're the only genuine thing in my life, and I'm not losing that, because some people think class boundaries matter more than actual connection. I let myself believe him because the alternative is protecting myself from potential hurt by maintaining distance that's already been thoroughly destroyed. And lying here in his arms in the quiet aftermath feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in years of careful survival. Chapter 7. Who laughed last? 7. 6 months after the gala that changed everything, I'm standing in front of my bathroom mirror getting ready for another charity event. But this time, the dress is one I chose myself with money I earned from the consulting work I've been building since leaving Julian's employment, and the woman staring back looks significantly more confident than the one who'd nervously accepted an invitation that felt like social suicide, disguised as opportunity. The university acceptance letter arrived last week. Full scholarship to a literature program I'd only dreamed about when survival took priority over education. And Julian's face when I'd shown him the notification had been worth every anxiety about whether I was capable of existing in academic spaces where my background would be constantly evaluated and questioned. You're doing that thing where you overthink while staring at your reflection. I can tell because you've been holding that earring for 3 minutes without actually putting it on. Julian's voice from the doorway makes me smile, and when I turn, I find him watching with the kind of open affection that still surprises me, even after months of being together without employment complications, making everything questionable. I'm processing the fact that we're going back to the same venue where everyone thought you'd lost your mind 6 months ago, except now I'm attending as your actual girlfriend instead of just your questionable date choice. You were never questionable. Everyone else's reactions were questionable. You were perfect then, and you're perfect now, except with significantly more confidence and less concern about what people think. He moves into the bathroom, hands settling on my waist as he meets my eyes in the mirror. Also, you're going to that event as someone who earned her own success rather than just accepting mine, which makes tonight even more satisfying than the original gala where you just destroyed everyone's assumptions about who deserves to occupy certain spaces. I'm nervous about seeing all the same people who spent weeks gossiping about whether I'd trapped you or you'd experience some kind of breakdown. Facing them again feels like volunteering for judgment I could easily avoid. Except you're not the same person they judged 6 months ago. You're someone who's built a consulting business and earned a university scholarship and proved that their assumptions about class and worth were always fundamentally wrong. His reflection in the mirror shows pride that makes my chest warm. Let them see what you've accomplished. Let them realize that dismissing you was their loss, not yours. And if anyone makes tonight difficult, I'll handle it the same way I handled everything else, by making consequences permanent for people who can't manage basic respect. The venue is exactly as intimidating as I remember, all crystal and expensive people making polite conversation. But walking in on Julian's arm this time feels fundamentally different than the terrified entrance 6 months ago when I'd been convinced everyone could see through my borrowed dress to the housekeeper underneath. The whispers start immediately when we enter, all poorly disguised interest as people process that we're still together, and apparently serious enough to keep appearing publicly despite the initial scandal our relationship created. Elena Russo approaches first with genuine warmth, pulling me into a hug that suggests we've maintained the friendship that started at the original gala, despite my concerns about whether people from her world would actually want continued connection with someone from mine. You look absolutely radiant. I heard about the university acceptance and the consulting work. I'm so proud of how you've built something entirely your own instead of just becoming an extension of Julian's world. Her enthusiasm is infectious and genuine. Also, half the room is dying to know if you're still together, and the other half is trying to figure out how to apologize for the things they said 6 months ago, without admitting they were wrong about everything. Let them wonder. I'm done caring what people think as long as the people who actually matter are supportive. Good. That confidence looks excellent on you. Keep it. Marcus and Caroline appear with expressions that suggest they've spent considerable time deciding how to approach this interaction. And when Marcus extends his hand with genuine respect rather than condescension, I realize that Julian's threat about business consequences had apparently been taken seriously. Iris, you look lovely. I wanted to apologize for my behavior at the last event. I was dismissive in ways that were inappropriate regardless of circumstances. Apology accepted, though I appreciate you recognizing it was inappropriate rather than just unfortunate misunderstanding. Caroline adds her own apology with less grace, all stiff words that suggest someone coached her on appropriate contrition, and watching them both treat me with careful respect is more satisfying than I want to admit given that 6 months ago they'd been among the cruelest in their judgment. The evening progresses with introductions and conversations where I'm treated as Julian's equal rather than his questionable choice. All careful courtesy from people who've apparently decided that being on his bad side isn't worth maintaining their original opinions about appropriate relationships. David Chen finds me during dinner with updates about the consulting project he'd hired me for, praising work I'd done with enough sincerity that several nearby conversations pause as people process that I'm not just Julian's girlfriend, but someone building actual professional credibility, independent of his influence. You're collecting respect at the same rate you collected interest last time, except now it's based on actual accomplishment rather than just surprising people with your existence. Julian's voice is warm with approval, as we escape to the same balcony where he'd first admitted feelings 6 months ago. I'm still processing that people who dismissed me are now treating me like I matter. It feels surreal in ways I'm not entirely comfortable with yet. You always mattered, they just needed time to recognize what I saw from the beginning, which is that you're exceptional, regardless of where you came from or how you earned your living. That's remarkably romantic for someone who spent 3 years pretending I was just good at making coffee. I was protecting us both from complications I wasn't ready to handle. But I'm done protecting us from anything except people who still think birth circumstances matter more than actual character. A woman I don't recognize watches from across the balcony with an expression that's carefully neutral, but somehow feels loaded with assessment. And when Julian notices her attention, his expression shifts into something guarded that suggests history I'm not aware of. That's Victoria Ashford, Natalie's older sister and someone I dated briefly years ago before realizing that appropriate credentials don't compensate for lack of actual connection. His hand tightens on my waist. She's been calling since the original gala trying to arrange meetings to discuss what she calls my questionable relationship choices. I've been ignoring her because engaging would suggest I care about her opinion. She's watching us like she's calculating something. That feels less like concern about your choices, and more like someone who doesn't appreciate being replaced by staff. Victoria has never appreciated anything that suggests her world isn't as exclusive as she believes it to be, but her disapproval is irrelevant to anything that actually matters. Victoria approaches before we can retreat back inside, all calculated grace and practiced charm that barely disguises the assessment happening behind polite words. "Julian, how lovely to see you actually settling with someone. I was beginning to think you'd remain perpetually unavailable out of commitment issues or impossibly high standards." Her voice carries implications that make it clear she's fishing for information while delivering backhanded compliments. "I was waiting for someone genuine, Victoria, which required turning down several offers from people who were significantly more interested in my last name than my actual personality." The response is pointed enough that even she can't miss the implication, "And you found genuine in someone who worked in your house. How very egalitarian of you to look beyond traditional boundaries." The way she says it makes traditional boundaries sound like something worth preserving. "I found genuine in someone who saw me as a person, rather than a resource to be exploited. Yes, I can see how that concept would be foreign to people who've spent their lives networking strategically rather than connecting authentically. Well, I wish you both every happiness, though I do wonder how sustainable relationships built on such different foundations actually are long-term." Victoria's smile doesn't reach her eyes. "I suppose time will tell whether love is enough to bridge gaps that society exists to maintain." She leaves before either of us can respond, and the implicit threat in her parting words hangs in the air with weight that suggests she's not done trying to create problems for a relationship she clearly disapproves of. She's going to be trouble. I can tell by the way she's already calculating how to undermine us while maintaining plausible deniability. Let her try. We've survived 6 months of gossip and judgment from people significantly more influential than Victoria Ashford. Whatever she attempts isn't going to change anything between us. "You're very confident for someone whose ex-girlfriend's sister just implied our relationship has an expiration date." "I'm confident because I know what we've built, and I know it's stronger than whatever Victoria thinks she can destroy through social maneuvering." He pulls me closer, and the city lights create a backdrop that's almost romantic. "She entered your life invisible and left unforgettable. That's not something that fades just because people who used to matter decide they disapprove." Did you just quote something I said 6 months ago back to me? I remember everything you say. It's part of why I fell in love with you in the first place. We return to the ballroom, and I'm struck by how different this feels from 6 months ago. Walking through crowds that part with respect rather than judgment. Being treated as someone who belongs rather than someone who accidentally stumbled into spaces she wasn't meant to occupy. Julian keeps me close, but it feels like partnership rather than protection. Two people who chose each other navigating a world that's slowly accepting they're not going anywhere regardless of disapproval. As we leave, I catch Victoria watching from across the room with an expression that suggests she's already planning whatever intervention she thinks will separate us. But standing here with Julian's hand in mine and 6 months of built foundation behind us, I find I'm not particularly concerned about threats from people whose approval I never needed in the first place. I survived being invisible. I thrived being seen. And whatever comes next, we'll handle it together the same way we've handled everything else since that first invitation that everyone thought was a joke. The end.